Thank you, welcome, and thanks for joining Climate Jobs for Regeneration, Blending Tech and Nature, presented by Regen City as part of Europe Climate Career Week and in partnership with RegenIntel. We're thrilled to have a panel of inspiring leaders and experts here today to explore the emerging nature tech ecosystem, offering insights into key trends, challenges, and real-world applications in addressing the climate and biodiversity crisis. My name is Angela. I'm co-founder of Regen City. We're an ecosystem builder for nature-positive and regenerative cities, a spin-out from RegenIntel. We're based in London and regularly host in-person and virtual events spotlighting nature-based solutions and regenerative innovators. Our in-person events are typically interactive outdoor experiences. So recently we partnered with Terra.do to host a tour with Sugi, an organization dedicated to urban greening, visiting pocket forests around London. We'll be posting more of these types of events in the coming months. So before we start, I have a few housekeeping notes. This session is being recorded and will be posted on YouTube after. Our format for today will begin with a 40-minute panel discussion, followed by 10 minutes of Q&A before we close. If you have any questions, please use the Q&A box, and we invite you to upvote each other's questions. We also have our wonderful support team from Regen City, our co-founder Kat Toe, who will be keeping an eye on the chat. And it is with great pleasure to welcome our moderator for today, Lucy Almond, Director and Chair of Nature4Climate. I connected with Lucy while I was at the TNFD Secretariat supporting the team on the global campaign launch last year. Nature4Climate was a key event partner, and I'm thrilled that she's able to join us here today. I'll now hand over to Lucy to introduce herself and get started with the panel.
Thanks very much, Angela, and hi everyone. Thanks ever so much for joining us today. I'm really delighted to be here and talk to you on this topic. Before I introduce our expert panelists, I also just want to give a little bit of background on Nature4Climate. So I helped set up Nature4Climate back in 2017. And we are a coalition of some of the world's biggest environmental organizations and UN agencies and private sector coalitions. And we've come together to help really promote the role of nature as a climate solution. And so we do a lot of work around communications, advocacy, and movement building. And nature tech has been a topic that we've been working on for the last couple of years and we can get into how and why nature tech has evolved during that time. So I am really pleased to help moderate this discussion today and introduce the panelists that we have. So we are joined by Edward Asseily, who is CEO of Zulu Ecosystems, who are helping to restore nature at scale. We're delighted to have Mamta Mehra, who is the co-founder and nature-based solutions lead at RegenIntel, which is a global educational platform that leverages regenerative climate solutions. And also delighted to have the Chief Product Officer of Dendra Systems, Chris Moisan. Dendra is an environmental technology company with a mission to enable ecosystem restoration at a global scale. So before we get into our discussions, I'm going to ask each of our panelists to come in and help explain a little bit about your career journey, your interest in nature and environmental related work, and a brief overview of the organization you're represented today. And I will start with Ed. Over to you.
Hi, everyone. Thanks a lot, Lucy. Great to be here. So I started my journey as an investor and as somebody from the finance sector, working as a startup founder and an investor in the fintech space, particularly. And about 4 years ago, I was invited to really help look at a business that was trying to do something in the nature space. And I really very quickly realized that actually everything else I was doing was pretty much irrelevant. And I needed to focus all my time on this one opportunity. And so that's what I've been doing for the last sort of 4 or so years. I love what I do. I love the people involved in this space. I love the technical challenges that we face. I love the scientific challenges, and I love the impact. So I would encourage all of you who are here just to keep going. It's a fantastic place to be.
That's great. Thanks, Ed. And Mamta, over to you.
Thank you, Lucy. Hi, everyone. It's nice to be here with all of you today. So my name is Mamta Mehra. I hail from the Himalayas in India. And my journey or entry into the space is really because I belongs to a family of small farm holders. So having seen the hardship of the communities when we used to go back for summer vacation, I think that really inspired me and motivated me to pursue my higher education in this sector. And since 2009, I've been working in this sector, initially more into the climate adaptation side. But 2015, when I joined Project Drawdown as a senior team and started working on the nature-based solution as a lead and looking the systemic perspective, I think I moved more into the climate mitigation aspect. And currently I am. I'm really fortunate that in those last 15 to 16 years, I got to work on a variety of projects with a range of stakeholders, and that has given me a different perspective besides what we used to get from our academics. And currently, I'm the co-founder of RegenIntel, a regenerative and climate solution public beneficiary. We provide services in three areas: research, transformation, and education, as Angela has pointed out. I think one of the key strengths of RegenIntel is our cosmos of stars, who are the global thinkers and doers. And the idea is that we collectively, the collaboration we really feel is the strength. We can transform today's challenges into tomorrow's opportunities, as you were pointing out about the potential and the implication of opportunities, aligning our economy with the well-being of our planet. And our education platform is really, we aspire to activate humanity to become a planet positive species. And we wanted to equip the current and future leaders like you all with a comprehensive and systemic understanding of global systemic challenges we all are facing, and understanding of the importance of adopting a mindset that's centered around human and planetary well-being. And finally, to provide practical skills so that we can effectively implement regenerative climate solutions within our communities and organizations. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you. Thanks, Mamta. And Chris, over to you.
Hi, everyone. It's great to be here. And also amongst, a great panel too. So I'm relatively new to the climate nature world. I've spent my career in kind of what I call now traditional technology. And I've had this sort of meandering career. When I look back, I've always been attracted to industries and sectors going through sort of structural change. And then in 2018, I just had another kid. I just read Homo sapiens book. There was a certain person in power in a big country. And it was at that point where I decided that I wanted to dedicate the rest of my career to trying to, address what I see as the dual climate and nature crisis. And I went on this sort of personal journey to try and work out what can someone that really knows about bits and bytes and software do for a problem which is about physical things in some sense. So I did some study. I tried to speak to as many people. I was like spamming people on LinkedIn to try and get stories. Spoke to lots of academics and scientists. And what I concluded was that this poly crisis needs to be addressed at both system and behavioral change. But it's also an incredible innovation opportunity. And from that, I thought, well, there may be an opportunity for someone like me that's been used to developing new solutions for getting, solving new problems and getting fast feedback cycles. What we're trying to address here, we've never really addressed before. And so I thought, well, maybe there is an opportunity for me. And I then found myself, had an opportunity to go and work in carbon accounting with 150 of the smartest sort of people that understand everything about supply chains. And that was a brilliant experience because I got to understand how that part of that world works. I then joined a scale-up business that was trying to reduce emissions in commercial real estate, because that's a significant emissions sort of category. And they were using technologies to try and reduce those emissions. And then coming back to where I am today, 18 months ago, I joined Dendra. Now, Dendra is a company that's I was attracted to for many reasons. It's got a female CEO. I actually like working for female CEOs. It's got some incredibly smart people, and totally mission aligned. And what we do is help environmental teams across a whole plethora of sectors manage this complex physical restoration process. So we're trying to improve the data decision making in terms of that restoration process. But crucially, if you look at the challenge we have and the money going into it, we also need to help everybody in this sector drive more finance into this area, because there's a finance gap and we need more investment in this area. So Dendra works on, it's made its name working in terrestrial restoration, so big mining companies that we need for the transition. They have a compliance need to address the land that they significantly disrupt. And we've also got we've recently moved into coastal restoration and got a huge project trying to scale up mangrove restoration in the Gulf. It's great to be here, and I hope my experience can be helpful to some of you guys.
Great. Thank you. Thanks, all three of you. Well, I mean, such a broad range of experience to be ended up working in this sector. I'm just going to focus a little bit now on the kind of why we're all here. Why is nature so important? Why now? Why are we all seeing people coming from one sector and moving more into the kind of nature space? Obviously, from Nature4Climate's point of view, this is an area we've been working on for the last 7 or 8 years, and everyone in our sort of nature and climate nexus is talking a lot about nature-based solutions or variations on that term. And so, Mamta, I'm going to ask you, given your expertise, why is nature so important? Why now? And why are nature-based solutions or variations on that term so crucial?
Thank you, Lucy, for asking this incredibly important questions. I think we are at a moment, it's already late though, but still it is a very crucial moment that the cost of inaction is going to threaten our food system, natural system, and the resilience of the communities everywhere. So it's a high time. And the nature-based solutions, or the range of the other terms goes with that, not only help in mitigating climate change, but also offers a range of cascading benefits, I think, that are very important to rebuild our damaged ecosystem so that we can sustain all forms of lives. However, as you pointed out, there are a range of terminologies, and NbS has enormous opportunities, but we must thoughtfully approach it. Too often, nature-based solutions initiatives fell into the trap of considering treating nature as a resource or a commodity, rather than a living system which demands equal respect and regeneration. When done poorly and with the hidden and bad intentions, NbS can lead to greenwashing with a major harm, where large-scale projects, monoculture projects, displaces the local and indigenous communities, and oversimplifying the complexity, the beauty of our ecosystem into simplified version of application of afforestation, just for an example, that reduces or harms our biodiversity. So that's why at RegenIntel, we are very cautious about using the term NbS thoughtfully, and we feel that the regenerative nature-based solutions, a model that centers around restoration and the long-term vitality of our ecosystems guided by indigenous wisdom and community leadership, should be the way forward. And more importantly, the application, it's good to identify nature-based solution, the importance of that, but how we are implementing those. So a systemic and holistic perspective to that is very important, and customizing solution to location-specific needs is equally important, because we cannot have a one-size-fit approach to all locations, all of the degraded or protected land areas we have. So I feel that we really need to act now. We have, as I've said, that we are already reached a tipping point. We have reached a stage where any further delays could lock us into cycle of severe environmental degradation, from where going back or reversing is going to be very difficult. In fact, the time to act is now into today. While we're having this panel discussion, I believe some prime forests in some part of the world are going to be cut down. So by investing in regenerative solution now, we are not just addressing the existing climate and other environmental challenges, we are creating a legacy of resilience, biodiversity, and harmony for with nature for generations to come. This is our last chance to transform our relationship with our Mother Earth while we still can.
Thank you, Mamta, for that very important backdrop to really the shift in the conversation on to the kind of emerging tech solutions that we're seeing plays out against a genuine ecosystem backdrop. So on that, in terms of what is nature tech and the key trends within nature tech, I think it's important to, first of all, have a shared understanding of the definition of what nature tech actually means. It is a very nascent emerging sector about which Nature4Climate has been trying to put some guardrails in the last couple of years so that there is a shared understanding of what good nature tech looks like to enable and accelerate the scale up of high integrity nature-based solutions. And when we first started talking on this topic a couple of years ago, we used that narrow definition of what nature tech was because we could see that that was where most of the innovation was happening, was what was the technology that was enabling and accelerating the scale up of nature-based solutions. Since the original paper that I think we did 2 years ago, the definition has evolved a little bit. The sector is getting kind of broader. And so in the last report that we issued actually during COP16, we used a slightly broader definition of nature tech, which is kind of all technology that is enabling the transition to a nature positive world. And so it's a little bit broader than this kind of pure nature-based solutions lens. So I'm just going to ask our panelists to talk a little bit about the trends they see emerging in this sector. And also feel free, Ed and Chris, I'm going to come to you first. Feel free to talk a little bit about the definition as well that you see, because obviously you're both coming at it from a different company perspective. But fundamentally, what trends do you see emerging in the sector? For example, the potential of AI to support nature protection and restoration. Ed, I'll come to you first.
Great. Thanks, Lucy. It's probably worth me just quickly providing a bit of context about what we do with nature tech and how we fit into this space. So we started out really trying to solve a problem, which is how do we restore nature at scale, and how do we really leverage the power of technology and the power of finance actually to really help make that happen in an accelerated way. So real believers in the power of tech and the importance of nature. The starting point for us is also then recognizing that actually this is a very challenging multidisciplinary problem. If we're going to solve for nature, there's no sort of easy fix. And I think, as Mamta was saying, there's not sort of a single global solution that's going to solve everything. And so really we've got to take quite a granular focused approach. And in the same sort of way, as you've got sort of, right tree, right place, you've got horses for courses, you've got lots of analogies around different ways of saying the same thing. There are lots of different technologies that are going to be needed or that are needed, and that in fact are emerging to solve a lot of different problems in this space. So, we're all very familiar with, satellite imagery and the power of this sort of big data and our ability to use AI to interrogate that data and to provide insights on the ground around what's going on now, what's possible, and indeed how are things changing over time. And these are very important for a number of reasons in terms of within the nature space. And there is a huge amount going on in terms of how we read nature. What is there out there? How might it change? How is it evolving? How is it responding to climate change? All of these things are super important. There's a lot around modeling and how we can actually simulate. Nature is inherently very, very complex. And so there's a lot of science around it, but we can't really wait for the science to tell us the answers. So what we really need to do is start to anticipate that, to start to modeling these things. And these models are inherently deeply complex because they're so multivariate. So anyone who has a good head for maths and stats is going to have, effectively a lifetime of employment here, because we've really got to try and figure out and anticipate, but also be aware of potentially unintended consequences in terms of some of the work that we do on the There's a huge amount on the bio side of the tech, if you like, the biotech dimension of nature tech. So, eDNA testing, monitoring, also things like, how we introduce things like fungal technologies into, for example, accelerating growth, understanding the symbiosis between different species and how these things evolve, how things respond to climate change, can we make them more resilient, and so on and so forth. And then there's also, there's a fintech dimension, to what extent can we create marketplaces for nature? To what extent can we help bring supply and demand together? Can we aggregate those things, and so on? So, we could go on. And then there's also, it's probably a last thing I want to maybe emphasize, which is how do we make it relevant to people? How do we bring nature into people's lives in a more direct way? How do we get people to, to contribute more through citizen science and other ways to this process? So it's a bit of a shopping list, and apologies for that. But I think we're right at the beginning. We're barely scratching the surface. And if I would say there's one trend in the last sort of 4 years that I've been in this space, it's just the massive acceleration of interest in this space, the proliferation of new people doing amazing things, the challenge in keeping up, but also the wealth of opportunity for young talent who are mission driven and who really want to make a difference. I mean, there is something out there for everyone.
Great, thanks, Ed. Chris, over to you. What trends do you see in this emerging sector?
Yeah, thank you. I mean, technology can't be for technology's sake. Ultimately, it's in service of the outcome, and I think that's really, really important. And so, as some of Ed and Mamta said, there are improving these outcomes. There are lots of opportunities across the stack where we could do that. Kind of just like we've seen technology applied in the health domain to improving the effectiveness there. I think the second thing that technology provides is, and a trend is, helping to bring more transparency. If you look at the way that we restore land, degraded land, historically, the ways that we've done that have been fit for the resources that we had. In my world, that's, traditionally, and it's kind of the gold standard, an ecologist will go out, they will do a baseline of an area and then come up with a plan to do that. But an ecologist, can only survey a certain proportion of land within the constraints that they have and the resources that they have. Now, as Ed said, with satellite technology, with other data, instead of just having this window on this small pocket, we're able to survey, sub-centimeter detail to really understand and get a much better baseline. But also, nature doesn't work like a kind of graph on an Excel spreadsheet. These are multi-year cycles, and it doesn't follow a straight line. A very hot summer, a very wet winter will change that pattern. And we need to, through technology, I believe that we can, have a much more adaptive approach to the way that ecosystem is being addressed. And then the final trend is that, nature solutions and restoration require this mix of stakeholders, from the indigenous owners, from the people doing it. It's an army of consultants. There's a whole village of people involved in this. And I think that what technology can do, and we've seen it in other areas of our life, in social, it can be the glue to bring these together. And there's one fact I heard about this the other day, why this is so important. Like if you take the rights of indigenous people, so if you look at the energy transition, we need to mine to get these important minerals to help us transition away from fossil fuels. There was a report out recently that said 50% of those minerals either exist on indigenous lands or very close to indigenous lands, and so we have to we have to bring all of these stakeholders, the entire village together, the people working on this. And I think, you know, what we found in our world, we've got a couple of really progressive mining companies, and we work very closely with the indigenous landowners for many, many reasons. Firstly, the great reason is they now have a lot more power. You know, they never did. And this is, I'm talking about Australia at the moment. The second reason is they have, you know, the richest sort of knowledge of the biodiversity. And so our ecology team work with them to help the mining company, and together it's kind of this, the three of us work in restoring those land to ensure that what we're restoring to is a resilient, you know, sustainable ecosystem. And so I'm excited by that, how technology can bring together those stakeholders as well.
That's great, thank you. And I'm going to bring Mamta in actually here at this point. So Mamta, I know this is something that you're particularly keen on, but how can we ensure that these nature tech solutions are people and community centered? Because obviously a lot of the nature tech startups, you know, they come out of New York or California or London that feel a million miles from where the ecosystems are. So what's your view on how we can ensure these nature tech solutions remain people centered?
Thank you, Lucy. Yeah, this topic is quite close to me. And as Chris and Ed has pointed out, the relevance of including all the stakeholders. And in all the stakeholders, I believe that the communities where we have these ecosystems or where you want to implement the nature-based solutions are very important. I think truly to make communities leader in nature-based solutions, we need to go beyond the notion of treating or considering them as recipient or beneficiary. They need to be, you know, equipped with skills, knowledge, and resources so that they can have this solution, integrate their own knowledge and wisdom to that, and be financially independent or have some stake on that so that they could be the co-owner in that entire application and implementation. Because when they will have the stake, they will not only take that implementation project more actively, but also could see the benefit coming out of that and would be much more interested and involved in that entire process. Because a lot of time we see the setbacks, communities are not responsive, or most of the time it is the operations are just limited to the project period. The post-period failures, we all are aware of that. So having that long-term vitality of any project related to the application of nature-based solutions involving these communities upfront is very important. Respecting the indigenous and local knowledge is very important. And sometimes I feel quite surprising that, you know, people from America and all that, what you quoted, go with a prescription that, oh, you have to implement these things. And we are talking to people and communities who are managing these resources since generations. So again, you know, bringing them upfront is very important. And finally, I believe that we should not just, you know, consider them as to implement, also provide the financial mechanism, also the risk aversion measures like insurance and all that, because you cannot have them to be the forefronters or do this or transition from the traditional way of doing to more regenerative, more nature-based thing without providing the right kind of proofing. So I think it's important to have all these enablers, and technology can play a very, very important role over there so that these communities invest confidently without the fear of any risk, debt, and be the leader in this space and show that world that the community-led nature-based solutions could have a very long-lasting impact.
Great, thank you. Thanks, Mamta. I guess one of the things where this topic comes alive for me is when people start to talk about the real world examples. So how are these technological applications actually playing out in the real world? So Ed and Chris, I'd be interested to hear from you, you know, examples of how your organization is leveraging this innovation that's occurring right now, and what really excites you. What are some of the kind of geeky, nerdy things, I guess, that really excite you about this at the moment, Ed?
Sure, thanks, Lucy. So a couple of things, tangible things that we're doing right now. So one is, in fact, I'm just at this conference today to talk about this. We're working with one of the water companies in the UK. Water is a major problem across the world, and many places already suffering very severely from drought flood, as we've seen very tragically in Spain recently, and elsewhere. And we have quality issues pretty much everywhere. Many people have to pay for clean water every single day, just to keep going. So these are really big challenges everywhere. But what's extraordinary is that the UK, a country which is sort of famed for its rain and its abundant green landscapes, is actually one that suffers also from drought, from flood, and from water quality pretty much everywhere. So what we're doing is we are working with one of the water companies to really look at a catchment scale. This is a 1,200 square kilometer catchment as a pilot. We are modeling how nature can be enhanced and enriched within that catchment, where that will have the biggest impact in terms of the ability of the landscape to sequester water into aquifers and to mitigate and slow down floods, for example, and improve water quality, how much carbon that will sequester, what kind of biodiversity impact would it have, and really looking to match and aggregate, if you like, supply of land for these sorts of projects, and with quantified outcomes, with demand for those quantified outcomes. So this is a complex optimization challenge. There's what's geeky about it is it geeks out, if you like, everything from the modeling challenges that we have to do here. We're dealing with very large data sets, lots of complex multivariate drivers and models, lots of scenarios. But we're also looking at the financial geekiness, if you like, of how do we value these things. We need sort of good economists and people who can sort of start to put numbers around these things and financial modeling. We also need, if you like, to engage real people and understand how people think and mindsets and so on. This is about providing also transparency. So even something as arguably low tech, but nevertheless incredibly powerful as, data visualization. How do we convey complex ideas, complex things to people in a way that they can understand and engage with? So this is one specific tangible project that may be of interest.
That's great. Thank you. Thanks, Ed. And Chris, what about you?
Okay, yeah. So some of the things that sort of get me out of bed. I mean, I'm lucky. I work with some incredibly smart people, and what they're doing in terms of blending different data sources is absolutely fascinating, and the insights they're able to draw from that. An area that Dendra has been focusing on is how do we develop and make available AI and ML models which can empower the local people and local context. And it kind of goes back from what we spoke about at the start. There's not a kind of a one size fits all. Every nature product or restoration project is has very local context. And so it's not possible for someone sitting in New York or London to kind of say, we've got the answer over here. And so what we've been focusing on is how can we train models and then make those models and tools available for local organizations to benefit from them. Because, if you're a local project developer, you may not have and often don't have the skills and the capabilities. So how can we make this more accessible? And that kind of goes right across the restoration sort of stack, from improving where and when you intervene, because, ultimately we're trying to intervene and do better than nature, or we're trying to conserve the natural process. How do you monitor those? So what tools can I use to provide that monitoring so I can make adaptive decisions, or I can demonstrate to the funders of these projects? And how can we use technology? And we've had some success here to look at like risk mitigation. Nature restoration is a long process; it's multi-years. And so how can technology mitigate risk, but also be like an early warning system that something's not working as well, and therefore we need to move our physical resources and our team's resources into that area. So yeah, those are the things that Dendra's focused on is how can we get more of these tools that have been developed centrally into the hands of more people.
Great, thank you. I'm conscious of time, so I think we have kind of one more round of questions before we get into perhaps we'll end with some advice for our nature tech job seekers. But before we get to that phase, I want you all to think about the future, basically. So having just come from COP16, so I spent a week in Colombia at COP16, and then next week will be at Baku for the climate COP, just reflecting on really the future. I mean, obviously COP16, the outcome was sort of somewhat depressing in that we didn't get the overarching agreement that we were looking for, but there were some bright spots, particularly around nature tech, I think. I mean, what I witnessed was obviously the coming together of the climate and the nature conversation in a way I hadn't seen before. There were many people focused on those two topics in a simultaneous way, which is really good news, given that they are, two sides of the same coin. So I think just reflecting a little bit on COP16, COP29, how do you see the nature tech ecosystem evolving in the next few years, in the next critical decade in the run up to 2030? And what is it that kind of, I guess, gives you hope for your vision for what a tech-enabled nature positive future looks like? And so, Mamta, I'll come to you first, and then Ed and Chris.
Yeah, Lucy, as you mentioned that, although it's not that quite hopeful, the COP16 outcomes, but one of the positive implication is that people are recognizing the importance of nature-based solutions to indigenous communities. But I think it's still insane in words. We need to translate all those things into actions and hold ourselves accountable for that. And in my vision of a regenerative future, I really want to see technology and nature to be an ally, to be a partner together, where involving people taking steps to restore and protect the planet. In this vision, I'm going back again to the communities, especially the indigenous and local groups are not just participatory one, they are empowered, emboldened, and are equal stakeholders in all decision making. And I think that I'm quite hopeful with my vision, but a lot of time when we see a slow progress towards that, it challenges my optimism. It's urgent. We are running out of time. I know that last 5 to 6 years, there are enormous growth in this sector, but it's still not to the scale what we want. Still only 3 to 5% of the total global finance, goes to the nature-based solution. There's a lot I believe can be done, and we need more and more traction here.
Thank you. Ed, what about you?
Look, I think that a couple of levels. I think on the sort of tangible, let's get things done level, there's a lot of work that's already happening, and I think many of us here are already contributing to, restoring natural environments in order to generate specific, measurable, tangible outcomes, and then getting stakeholders to engage with that in order to recognize those benefits. And hopefully our progress will be accelerated with regulation, with capital investment, with a general sort of awakening, if you like, of society to the urgency and the need for this. One of the things that, in a sense, I think slightly more esoterically and slightly perhaps more interestingly from a sort of longer term perspective, is how we're going to change mindsets. And I think where the power of tech is actually, it really brings that nature much more into our real lives. So we are now much more aware. For example, our ancestors used to see whales as these sort of really big, scary monsters. We now see them as these wonderful creatures that lead complex family lives. We could potentially even start to think about interacting with and communicating with. How we think about our natural environment, similarly, our awareness of how, mycorrhizal networks underground and how they interact with trees and how they think, and how they operate like societies and complex. Our whole awareness and immersion in nature and our relationship with nature, I think, will completely transform. And I think as we look forward another generation or two, I think we can look forward to really technology bringing us back into nature in a way that, in many ways, perhaps for our ancestors, technology took us out of nature. I think it's also going to help us bring us back into nature.
Great, thanks, Ed. And Chris, for you, the kind of future vision for you of nature tech.
I think you're seeing a lot of changes being driven by disclosure and reporting, and I think that's generally, even though when I talk to some people in corporates, they've just got over carbon reporting, and biodiversity feels like a one step too far. But I think generally that's a good thing. I'd like to say there would be more policy innovation, but it feels like we are going to have to rely, or the sort of the private sector is going to have to drive some of this. I think you're seeing on that point, you're seeing some more causal relationships between biodiversity and nature loss, and then traditional kind of measures of sort of productivity, and you could say capitalism. So I was talking to someone who an agricultural producer, and they've seen a 15-20% drop in their yields as a direct result from biodiversity loss in their area. And when you start seeing things like that, that starts changing people's approach. I was talking to another retailer that have seen that through regenerative farming practices, they can achieve the same yields, but the blocker for them is that there's almost an education of the farmers, because they've been brought up hooked on herbicide and pesticides. And this goes to another point. I think with more digitally native people within the environment sector looking at nature solutions, that's going to help as well, because a lot of the people that the brilliant scientists and academics, they've been brought up and learnt their trade using many of the traditional approaches, and as new people are coming in, they're embracing some of these new technologies. So I think that's going to be a positive impact on adoption, which we need.
Great, thank you, Chris. So we're going to open up to questions in a second. So get your questions ready. I can see some that are coming in the Q&A session and some in the chat. I guess just in very brief terms, you get kind of like a minute each on what advice would you give to people on our webinar today who are interested in using their career or skills to contribute to this nature positive future? What kind of advice can you give them from your own career perspective? And I'll go in a different order this time. Chris, we'll start with you.
We need more people. We need more ecologists, scientists, biologists. Every customer I talk to, there's not enough specialists in this field. And so if I was looking at my sort of degree options, I'd certainly be thinking about that. And technology is not going to displace those roles. We need more experts in that field. What else did I say? There's some of us mentioned this. There's a funding gap in this area. And so those of you that are financially literate or interested in that, we need more brain cycles into that. And I think that would be that would go. And the other thing I'd say is that nature, just like climate, affects all organizations. Everything we do has an impact on this. And so even though climate tech can seem like quite a narrow field, actually it's very broad. There are implications for all organizations, and nature and carbon affects every organization. So you can potentially find climate and nature jobs in some very traditional industries, and it's a much broader playing field than perhaps you might think it is.
Great, thank you, Chris. Mamta, over to you, and then Ed.
Okay, I'll build upon what Chris has already said, 100%. We need more and more professionals working on this area. In fact, I was reading the 2020 World Economic Report, and they said that by 2030, there would be a need of around 395 million jobs, especially in this nature-based solutions. So 6 years' time. So there's a very welcoming opportunity. My personal advice to all the inspiring professionals who wanted to, working in this area is to think about that what are your key strengths and what are your passions which you can align. As Chris mentioned, that there's a range, like it touches each and every aspect of our personal as well as professional life. So think about what you really wanted to do. Educate yourself, like, there is a need that what you can build upon based on your existing skills and careers. And the most important thing, which I often come across to people say is that, oh, if it is a transition, it means do I have to start from fresh? No, I think all your prior experience and skill sets are your superpowers and assets that needs to be used. Yes, with a little bit of polishing on that and more awareness and information on these sectors, you could be a great player to contributing to the implementation from designing a range of activities. I believe so. And I finally really like one of the great saying of one of the president of India, Dr. APJ Abdul Kalam. Always, whenever he meets to young people, he used to say that be bold, which means be good and do good.
Excellent. Ed.
Look, I think I think just to build on what others have said, maybe I think what's fair is that anybody who's working in this space has to be pretty mission driven. And why is that important? Because we're solving quite hard problems, new problems. And so we need to really keep our eye on the ball, keep our eye on the prize, and be prepared to go through some ups and downs to kind of get there. I think that's sort of one point I would make. The other is be multidisciplinary in your thinking. There is no, nature is in a sense an ecosystem. It's very complex. There's lots of different dynamics and dimensions going on. If we're going to make this thing work, not only at the ecosystem, at the natural level, but even at the human level, we've got to be able to work across many different disciplines. And we find this even with supposed experts, if you like, that actually they don't always agree. And it's in that not agreeing that actually the real magic happens. So we want people to not agree. We want people to challenge each other. We want to be able to really grow our understanding by bringing the soil scientists with the ecologists, with the economists, with the data scientists, with these hydrologists, and really by getting everyone to sort of challenge each other. That's where the really magic happens. And frankly, that's where it gets really interesting.
Yeah. Great, thank you. And I mean, I'll just add from my own perspective, one of the thoughts about this was, I think developing that specialist expertise early is really good so that you have like an anchor base of what your expertise is, but move in between sectors is one of the most important things I think you can do. I mean, I actually spent 18 years inside BP working in a big energy company. Doesn't feel like a natural fit to where I've ended up, but actually that experience of moving across the private sector and the public sector and different sectors has been incredibly helpful for me as well. So I think being kind of open-minded to the sectors you're going to work in is also key. Great. Well, thank you very much to our panelists. We're going to open up to questions. Angela, are you happy for me to go through this, or do you guys want to kind of curate the Q&A?
Yeah, you can go ahead if you want. Yep.
Great. Okay, so we've got 3 questions in the Q&A. I'm not sure which of our panelists might want to answer some of these because they're quite specific, but one of them is around the panelists' view on the role of design, UX and service product in the nature tech space. One of which the questions is around how do we in the global north ensure that we don't get sucked into colonial narratives and undertones, which is something that occurs a lot in our sector, I think, at the moment. And then a third question about what type of tangible steps can we cultivate to make nature tech a more accessible space, with a sort of underlying context around access to land and capital here. So to our panelists, are any of those you particularly would like to answer or offer thoughts on? Chris, I see you nodding.
Yeah, I'll take the one on design. So if that's okay, or at least I'll start, please chip in. So I think design plays an absolutely crucial part in this process. I think when it comes to carbon emissions, I think it's something like the design process, the start of the design process is responsible for something like 60% of the embedded emissions in products that get produced. And like translating that is like, we're designing, nature damage or carbon emissions into our products and services from the outset. So design has a really, really fundamental role to play in there. And, and I think it extends from, physical design, digital design, through to elements of service design. How are we bringing together, all of the stakeholders in a symbiotic way, and how are we bringing sort of creating and innovating new regenerative business models. And so I think, design plays a really crucial role because it's right at the start.
Thank you. Does anyone else want to come in on the design or any of the other questions?
Yeah, I'll say a couple of words about design, and then maybe I'll say a little bit about making it accessible. I'm not sure I got an answer, but so on design, I would agree. I think we need to change mindsets. We need to get a lot of people involved in making stuff happen, and so from a UX UI perspective, actually, I think conveying quite a lot of complexity, simply trying to help people see through that is very important. And there are many different stakeholders, so also adapting to different stakeholders is very important. The other thing I would say around accessibility, it may well be that land is fragmented, and ultimately is a capital. It's owned by people, but that's not always the case everywhere. And nature tech is very accessible. I mean, there's nothing stopping you doing science or doing tech work. There are a lot of companies out there, a lot of startups doing this work. There are also bigger companies doing this work, so you don't have to just join a startup. There are lots of, and even if you don't yourself own the land, you can work with other people's land. So, for example, we don't own any land. We convince other people to do good projects on their land. We convince other people to part with their capital in order to finance those projects. We convince governments to do that and change policies if necessary to make things happen. So ultimately, our job here collectively is get stuff done through others. We're not going to do it on our own, and we're certainly going to do it by owning things.
Great, thank you. Mamta.
And just to add on that, yeah, exactly. The space is more about collaborative approach, whether you own a land or not, there's a lot of role that collectively as a curator, as a community, we can play. And there the technology and the design and everything, can play a role because, as other panelists have pointed out, a lot of time there's still that jargons and complexity associated with the science behind nature-based solutions. So when they're going to the communities, to making it accessible in that way, engaging and interactive, I think this design can play a very important role. And the second question about the global north, I think I have already explained quite a bit on that. It's just that we need definitely a mind shift here. We need to consider everyone equal in this whole movement towards a regenerative future, and there are different ways bringing them. I don't want to repeat because of the timing issue here, but definitely if you start considering each species, not only like the Homo sapien, each species of this planet equal and treat them equally. And I think that's the vision of RegenIntel, is to activate humanity to become a planet positive species. And if we have that mind shift, I think we could do that quite easily.
Yeah, I fully agree with that. On the global north question, I've seen a shift happen even in the last few years from attitudes even within the big environmental NGOs. When Nature4Climate was set up, we were an organization of global north environmental NGOs, and we had a particular mindset and a particular narrative because of that. And that's really changed in the last 5 years. And it's all come about from the types of partnerships you select and the collaboration that you can take onto that. So as we head into COP30, we have a completely different group of people influencing our strategy and our narrative. And it takes a long time. And it does feel like sometimes that can slow you down, but it's been absolutely critical to getting a more inclusive approach to avoid that colonial narrative. And Kat, I see you wanted to answer one of the questions. Was that right? Or sorry if I misread that. That came up in the chat box, but if not, that's fine. No, okay, just came up there. So I know we only have a couple of minutes left, and I saw there was one more question, I think, in the chat around do you see any value in marketing experience applied to the regeneration field? I mean, my answer to this is absolutely. I mean, yes, we need all the experience that you can have, particularly coming from different industries. I think it's just a question of you explaining kind of what your basic skill set is and how that can work into this area. But I don't see why we wouldn't want marketing experience from all different fields. So some of the best marketers you speak to are the people who've worked in consumer goods companies and who come and bring a whole load of different ideas around communications and marketing in our sector. I don't know whether Ed, Chris, or Mamta, you have any thoughts on that as well.
I just wanted to jump in, there's a big gap also in the communication, the marketing. People are not imagine how many times in a dining table are we talking about climate solution or nature tech solution. That's also my vision, that has to be part of our day-to-day life conversation. And we need a lot of those marketing strategies so that people should start talking about it and start acting. 80% of the general people are unaware of these things.
Yeah, I'd second that. Part of the problem is the behavioral change challenge, and communications is the foundation of that. And so, more brains, more smart people, thinking about this, applying their craft to that is going to help the cause. So, bring it on.
Great. I know we're at time, so to say thank you very much for Regen City for hosting this, and to our wonderful panelists, Ed, Chris, and Mamta and Lucy. I'm sure we're all available on LinkedIn or elsewhere if you have follow-up questions. But Angela, back over to you. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you, Lucy, Ed, Chris, Mamta, for an incredible discussion today. We heard about key trends within a rapidly evolving nature tech ecosystem, real-world applications of technology in nature restoration. We also discussed some of the complex challenges and opportunities in scaling solutions, but also the crucial importance of a people or community-centered, holistic, inclusive approach to addressing climate and biodiversity crisis. So with that, I want to thank you, the audience, for participating today as well. Thank you for joining. We've got a survey, so before you go, if you could take a few minutes to give us some live feedback. This really helps us improve our events so we can support the wider community. And Europe Climate Career Week is still going on, so we've got a number of really great sessions this week. We recommend you checking them out on the website. I think Kat's going to put the link in the chat. And then as a follow-on session, Regen City is hosting another event tomorrow on career success stories, so featuring 3 professionals currently working in nature tech startups. They'll be sharing their journeys and practical advice for others, which we'll also post in the chat. Thank you so much, everyone.